Hi, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. We're doing something a little bit different this week because it's the end of a decade. And Matt and I have decided that rather than hit you with the latest developments, we're going to count down the top 25 stories of the 2010s. Number 1, President Trump. 2016 shocked the political world when Donald Trump was elected president. His opponent, former Senator, Secretary of State, and First Lady Hillary Clinton, was expected to trounce him. As the election went on, though, it was clear that it wasn't going to be the walk-off victory that everybody expected. When the polls closed and news broke that Trump had, in fact, defeated Clinton, social media and mainstream media alike had an absolute meltdown that really hasn't stopped since. Trump has dominated the news this decade in a way that nothing I've ever seen in my entire life has.
Number 2, Obama re-elected. President Barack Obama was re-elected as president after his victory over challenger Mitt Romney in 2012. It was a dead-even race to the end that was decided by battleground states. Both campaigns were affected by Hurricane Sandy, which hit the week of elections. Obama went on to continue his presidency's second term in the wake of a recession.
Number 3, the Fukushima disaster. In 2011, an earthquake and a tsunami combined to create 3 meltdowns at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. The damage was extensive and the government was forced to evacuate the area. They were also faced with the huge problem of radioactive waste pouring into the Pacific Ocean. Due to Japan's extensive efforts, by 2014 it was announced by the United Nations that the area and the damage was contained. Nevertheless, this modern-day Chernobyl has reawakened fears in the world's cleanest energy source, even as climate change has us desperately looking for a solution.
Number 4, the NFL kneeling protests. In 2016, NFL players sitting or kneeling during the U.S. national anthem during football games caught national headlines. The protests stemmed over social issues, but the primary one being criminal justice reform. This sparked heated controversy across the country as people either supported the movement or condemned it as being disrespectful to the nation. It even drew attention from the Oval Office, with Trump telling NFL teams to fire the players that knelt during the anthem. The movement later became focused on NFL player Colin Kaepernick. Kaepernick was let go by the NFL and subsequently got a nice, lucrative Nike contract for being the face of the movement.
Number 5, the Trump impeachment. Nothing is more polarizing than Donald Trump, and his impeachment is no different. Thus far, he has been quasi-impeached by the Democrats along strictly party lines in the House, and is likely to be found innocent in the Senate along strictly party lines there.
Number 6, Benghazi. In 2012, a coordinated attack took place against 2 U.S. government facilities in Benghazi, Libya. U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens, as well as Sean Smith, Tyron Woods, and Glenn Doherty were killed. In the aftermath, accusations were unleashed on the leadership for failure to act during the attacks and failure to provide security upon requests, which happened numerous times. Hillary Clinton was most notably blamed for her perceived lapses of judgment during the attacks. The attacks garnered mainstream attention after the successful release of the movie 13 Hours that depicted the events and the people involved.
Number 7, the Boston Marathon bombing. In April of 2013, 2 coward brothers, who we frankly are not going to name, set off bombs at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. The blast killed 3 people and injured 16 others, many of which lost limbs or eyesight. What was an attempt to rattle the American way of life instead turned into a rallying cry as Boston came together under the mantra Boston Strong. The terrorists were hunted down within 12 hours of the incident. The oldest brother died like a dog, as they say, while the youngest brother instead went to cowardice and surrendered to the authorities. He is currently awaiting the death penalty.
Number 8, the rise of ISIS. Following the fall of Al-Qaeda in the Middle East, ISIS, or the Islamic State, became the new assholes in town. ISIS marked a new level of extremism from Iraq to Syria that drew international attention. So in 2014, the US and other world coalitions began offensives against ISIS. In response to this, ISIS put Nick and Tim on their kill list. In 2018, President Trump announced the defeat of ISIS, which may have been a little premature, but was not totally inaccurate. In 2019, the last ISIS-held territory fell, and later after that, al-Baghdadi, its leader, was killed in a raid. Nick and Tim both survived.
Number 9, Osama bin Laden, the architect of 9/11, was killed. This was one of the happiest days of my life, and I don't really feel bad about that in any way, shape, or form. I'm glad he's dead.
Number 10, inequality protests. The Occupy movement. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, the pushback on inequality that dominated the decade. Whether you believe these things to be real, perceived, or a combination of the two, minority populations, whether gender, race, or income, have raged against the machine this decade.
Number 11, Marvel Comics. This was a good decade to be a nerd. Disney rebuilt an empire on the back of Robert Downey Jr. and has created what can only be considered as a cultural phenomenon. Comic books went from nerd fare to cool overnight, and even kind of minor characters like the Guardians of the Galaxy are now household names. Kevin Feige is the mad genius behind all of it, and at 46 years old, has presided over $26.8 billion of theatrical release. Stan Lee built the house, but Feige turned it into a castle.
Number 12, civil war in Syria. Syria had a brutal civil war that is one of the first touch points in a renewed Cold War with Russia. Thousands have been killed in what can only be described as genocide, leaving many Americans to ask where we fit in this policing the world bit. We said never again after World War II, but we also don't want to be embroiled in another Middle Eastern civil war. There's no definitive answer to this right now, and time will tell as it goes on.
Number 13, the United States legalizes same-sex marriage. To many people, this already seems like ancient history, but it was only 4 years ago that the United States government gave the right of same-sex couples to be angry and miserable at each other for a lifetime before finally realizing the sweet escape of death.
Number 14, the Charlie Hebdo attack in France. In 2015, after publishing comics about the Prophet Muhammad, 2 terrorists entered the magazine and shot it up, killing 12 people. The survivors did not back down and published the next week with the phrase, Je suis Charlie, meaning, I am Charlie. Most people rallied behind the magazine, citing that free speech is of paramount importance. Other people criticized the magazine, saying essentially that they asked for it. Those people are dumb. You either have free speech or you don't. You cannot create acceptable variants.
Number 15, climate change. When it comes to climate change, there are a lot of people arguing a lot of different things, but whether you believe climate change is just a natural progression of the planet, or whether you think it's entirely because of mankind, or a bit of both, it is absolutely the defining challenge of the next decade.
Number 16, the Haitian earthquake. In 2010, the catastrophic earthquake hit so bad that it left 1.5 million people in refugee camps and killed nearly 300,000 people. To put this in perspective, this is over 100,000 more people dead than the bombs of Nagasaki and Hiroshima combined.
Number 17, the Hong Kong protests. Hong Kong is merely the largest of the protests going around the world right now, where citizens are looking to their government for additional freedom. It's an interesting case study. Hong Kong has operated for many years under essentially British law, where they've allowed a democratic process, where they have allowed capitalism to reign, and they are clearly the most successful area in all of China. Nevertheless, China absolutely wants to put Hong Kong in line as part of the communist country. As Americans sit around and argue over which freedoms we should give up, it's extremely important to look at Hong Kong, where those freedoms are actually in jeopardy, and to see how fiercely they're fighting in order to keep them. What seems like something off in the distance right now might be the defining characteristic and challenge of the next decade.
Number 18, the 2014 Malaysian Airlines disappearance. On 8 March, an airline filled with 227 passengers and 12 crew members on its way to Beijing just disappeared. Despite a worldwide effort to find it, its disappearance remains a mystery. Was it terrorism? A Russian anti-aircraft missile as occurred 4 months later? Weather? We still hold out that someday drone technology will be able to discover the location and we'll all find out what happened.
Number 19, the Thai cave rescue. After a soccer tournament in Thailand, a group of students and their coach went on a cave exploration mission to try to bond. What they didn't expect was heavy rains that would rapidly turn what was an easy entrance to walk into an impossible exit. The team went missing for 18 days before a group of experienced cave divers, Navy SEALs, and entrepreneurs banded together to try to find a solution. The mission before them is what can only be described as one of the scariest things imaginable. Just looking at the pictures of what this cave looked like provides immediate anxiety. Everyone involved should have died, but somehow they didn't. In the process of rescuing these boys, one Thai Navy SEAL was killed, and that man will forever be a hero. But every single child and the coach walked out of that cave alive and healthy. The world was on the edge of its seat for days, but it bonded us in an incredible way in a time where almost everything creates problems.
Number 20, Las Vegas shooting. In 2017, the Las Vegas shooting shocked the US as a lone gunman opened fire on concertgoers. It was as large of an attack as a lone gunman has ever done in the US, and came just months after the Manchester bombing in England. This sparked heavy debate from both pro and anti-gun supporters. It raised many questions about the reality of our safety and our preparedness. Perhaps even bigger, though, was the total lack of information provided to the public about the attack.
21. The new space race. A few years ago, America had all but abandoned NASA. We didn't even have a way to get men into space without help from the Russians. And then came a host of entrepreneurs, including Elon Musk with SpaceX, and we reignited interest in worlds beyond ours. Under President Trump, we now have plans to return to the moon, to move forward to Mars, and we've even stood up a new branch of the military, the Space Force. This administration has rebuilt the biggest drive to re-explore the universe since the Apollo program, and it's a really exciting time to be alive.
Number 22, fake news and Jeffrey Epstein. This was the decade of pushback on traditional media and power institutions. Jeffrey Epstein, friend to the powerful and wealthy, American financier and sex offender, was found dead in his prison cell. And we, and the rest of America, refused to believe the story of which it happened. The official story is that he committed suicide. The guards were all asleep, the prison cameras were all dysfunctional, and even the autopsy said it looked like murder. But the story we got was that he hung himself. For once, the powerful didn't get their way. The internet would not accept the story, and Epstein remains a meme and a cultural phenomenon. Many believe this is the beginning of a change on how information is delivered. Institutions long since thought to be honorable are no longer trusted. There are inherent dangers to this, as people may choose the media that tells them what they want to believe, but it may result in a more honest media over time.
The Patriots win their 4th, 5th, and 6th Super Bowls, and went to a couple more. That's a lot of excellence all in one sentence. Just drink it in. 50% of the Super Bowls this decade, the Pats were there. Just let it simmer. Let it simmer.
24, gun violence. While data has shown that gun violence hasn't increased over the years, the attention on gun violence has. Specifically on gunmen who have gone after softer targets, such as schools. These events have been held up as both a reason to limit the Second Amendment or to double down on it, and has created one of the largest rifts in the American way of life.
Number 25, Harambe. We lost him because a parent thought it was a good idea to hang their small child over a fence where dangerous wild animals sat. So as you think back on the decade, think of Harambe, pour yourself some bourbon, and if you feel froggy, pull your dick out. You'll always be missed, Harambe. And finally, our honorable mentions. Now we know that our top 25 are not an extensive list of everything that's happened in the last 10 years, but if we had gone with 50, then Tom Hunt probably would have been really mad that he was sitting here all night. So we went with 25. Nevertheless, here are our honorable mentions for the decade. Hurricane Sandy, Harvey, and Maria.
The first female British Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher. Subsequently thrown out of office.
Game of Thrones.
Leo DiCaprio got an Oscar.
The BP oil spill.
Xi Jinping elected as Chinese president.
Notre Dame on fire.
Putin re-elected.
Cannabis legalization.
America infiltrates British royalty through marriage.
Bitcoin.
Migrant caravan.
Tinder and Snapchat.
WikiLeaks.
Free fall from outer space.
The World Trade Center Memorial opens.
The iPad was created.
Brexit.
Baby Shark. The decade also saw us lose a lot of great people. While obviously this list isn't all-inclusive, we wanted to highlight at least a few. Steve Jobs.
Carrie Fisher.
Michael Jackson.
Muhammad Ali.
Alan Rickman.
Joe Frazier.
David Bowie.
Stan Lee.
Robin Williams.
Gene Wilder.
Paul Walker.
Neil Armstrong,
Again, Harambe.
Aretha Franklin,
George Herbert Walker Bush.
and Whitney Houston.
And with that, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. Our news is at least as bad as the news you're getting already, and I've got to tell you, I didn't even expect to make it to the end of this decade, so I appreciate any of you that kind of stuck with me. Have a super happy new year, and look forward to seeing you in 2020.